And there's been a huge amount of work that's been happening, and so many of the people that are on this call have been a part of that. So we'll start out with just first of all saying I'm Michelle Nunn. I'm the CEO of CARE, but I'm also one of the leaders, the chair of the Action Track 4, along with a lot of other people that are represented here, who are providing extraordinary contributions and leadership. And so we have a full packed agenda today. Our opportunity is to gather together and to share some of what's been distilled over the last couple of months, but also hopefully to lay the foundation for the next wave of ideas to support us. So I am told that between all of the different mediums through which we are broadcasting this, that we expect to have over 800 people that are participating with us. So that's terrific, and we hope that that ripples out and goes on in terms of more and more people being a part of this, what's being called this sort of People's Summit. So I just want to remind you all, just to set the context, where are we? We have been spending a number of months, and for those who've been involved on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure it feels like even more than that, on this action track and this work. Our goal has been to solicit what we're calling a first wave of solutions, aimed specifically at advancing equitable livelihoods. So that of the 5 action tracks, that is Action Track 4. Our solutions have focused on everything from rebalancing agency within food systems, which we all recognize as being incredibly important, to eliminating worker exploitation and really ensuring decent work in food systems, and then localizing food systems. And we're going to hear about all of those things today and a lot more. So, I think if you've been involved in this, you have been a part of lively debates, let's say, and perhaps some disagreements, and that is a part of what we know that we were going to do when we rolled up our sleeves and said we're going to sit at a broad-based table that by nature of being a People's Summit will mean that we'll come together even across disagreements, and to have the opportunity to have those debates. So I'm really proud that we've been tackling controversial issues and that we welcome that debate. And I hope that that will continue to be the guiding spirit of our work together, both today and going forward. I'd like to think of it as a big table with a lot of boisterous conversation and some family disagreements along the way, but the opportunity to in the end be better for that, and to come up with an opportunity again to really take forward this work at a time when we know that it has never been more important. We've seen that so clearly over the last year, and so we need to really move forward with, I think, even a greater aspiration and a sense of momentum in order to, what we've been calling, build forward better after this pandemic. It's just a few months ago that it was estimated that half of the world's 3.3 billion global workforce were at risk of losing their livelihoods. And that's because borders were closed and trade was restricted. And we know that this hit farmers and those who are in the food system perhaps harder than most any sort of sector. And without the capacity to buy, sell, access the marketplace for your produce, so many have been facing really great devastation in terms of their income. So this pandemic has exposed what we already knew, which is there are extraordinary inequalities. And this is so true for some of the most marginalized populations, which are in the food system, and that's small-scale farmers and fisher folk, indigenous peoples, and seasonal and migrant workers. So unfortunately, these people are often the most underpaid, they're the least protected, and they're the most exploited around the world. And without social protection, without access to health care, without access to stable incomes or a safety net. So it really incumbent upon us, I think, to take the charge of this work incredibly seriously. And I am proud to say that we've done just that with a lot of creativity and a lot of exciting solutions that we're bringing forward to put on the table. And I, again, as I said, I think this has been an extraordinarily collaborative process, and I hope that we're able to continue that. Lots of consultation. I've been told that just in this past month, over 20 different consultations. So literally thousands of conversations that are part of what we're calling the sort of first wave of solutions that you're going to hear about today. And I think we've tried to make sure that that table was really broadly set, that that we really focused also on profiling, listening to, lifting up underrepresented voices, those who are not always at the table. And so we know that this first wave of solutions is exciting, but we also know that it's just the beginning. And so the opportunity today is to share some of those solutions that have emerged, but also to, as a founding ground, to sort of give us an opportunity to think about what are the next wave of solutions and how do we get you all thinking about those, and how do we get your participation in creating those. So that's our work today. And I guess I just want to conclude by saying how grateful I am for those who are giving their time, and just want to keep in mind that this is voluntary participation in this work. And we have so many people who are lifting up their voices, giving their best ideas in the spirit of this People's Summit and of really creating a more just world. So we're going to start out, we're going to have a series of kind of interventions in which we're going to share some of the solutions that have emerged. We're also going to have a chance to start out. We're going to hear from Juan Carlos, who is the leader of FAO's Right to Food team. And we're going to start, as I think it is sort of appropriate to start, with human rights. What is the foundational element of our work together? And I think that is this sort of social justice, human rights, and how do we apply that to food systems and to livelihoods. We're then going to have a series of presentations about the solutions going forward, and we're also then going to have an opportunity for questions and answers, and then we're going to have the opportunity for also hearing from some of our colleagues in the other action tracks, because ideally this is going to all come together for a broader ecosystem of change within the food systems. So let's just go ahead and get started. And I'm going to ask Juan Carlos, if you're on the line, to raise your voice and to offer us the opportunity to hear about sort of the heart of this work around the human rights.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the opportunity, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you. And guess that you are sitting around the world in different time zones. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
We can. It's a little small, but
okay, because I don't know. I'll have to fix it. I don't. Okay.
You see your mailbox. I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, shouldn't be. I'm trying. Don't know what happened with the PowerPoint. Sorry.
No worries. Well, I know we all know the challenge of figuring out where your slides are and how to get them up on the screen.
Is it now?
It is, and if you can make it even a little bigger, then we'll be perfect.
No, I can. No.
Oh, or just go back, because I think we can still see it if we want to.
Okay, sorry. I tried to rehearsal before to avoid this, and finally I was not able to do properly. Okay, I will try to keep the time to respect the right to participate of the others. Well, I was invited to talk about human rights and food systems in order to discuss if we can use human rights to have better solutions and better proposals. I know that all of you have been working in many, many different proposals, and now is the time of looking for some convergence and some synergies. And maybe human rights and right to food can help to this. In fact, we are here discussing about the reform of the food systems because the result of the way we work in the past has not been satisfactory. In fact, it has put us at risk. It's not only the climate change, it's also the COVID that both recall us that we are going in the wrong direction and that we have to change and avoid to continue doing business as usual. The current food system compounds inequalities that affect to workers, women, indigenous people, landless people, fisher folk, small-scale farmers, people with disabilities, migrants. And we have discovered through the pandemic that care and interdependence is something that we have been considering like something that is granted and that doesn't need recognition or be valued properly. But finally, we have discovered that during the pandemic, those that are in the position of producing food, providing care, that were ignored by the food system, were the essential people to keep alive the planet. And we share a planet that has limited capacity. And now we have to find a way to share the future. And this is why human rights are so important, because human rights provide a formula to discuss all together, to make a consensus all together about the future, a kind of social compact for the future. Human rights are universal, interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible. And this recall us that we have to think on all the human rights, not just on right to adequate food or right to education or right to whatever. When we talk about right to adequate food, we are talking about right to water, right to health, right to education, right to an adequate standard of living. So we need to consider all the human rights. It's not that we can fix the problem just looking at a small parcel of the system. And human rights can help us to have a sense of direction, to find a way to put together all the efforts in the same direction and to check if we are advancing or not. Because we have to address many different issues. And once we start working on our particular area of work, it's difficult to keep the same direction. So human rights help us to have a monitoring system that give us a sense of dimension of the transformations we need and if we are moving in the direction. And also can help us to put together the different action tracks. The different action tracks, probably you feel that have some overlaps. Well, this is not a problem. The problem is to have a way that we can have a coherent intervention and work together. The food system has so many different elements that if you cut the food system in a way, you will find that there are some overlaps between the different parts. And if you cut in a different way, then you will find other overlaps. So it's not that you look at the overlaps, it's that you look at the synergies. And how we can help to improve the results. Basically, by building agency of people to change the relations and transform structures. Applying a human rights lens, we can make things fairer, redress the power imbalances, assure inclusive economic recovery, and it's important, we have to start working right now. We cannot wait to provide solutions to the people, to the crisis caused by COVID 2, 5, or 6 years. We have to start working now. And we have to ensure that the recovery is inclusive from the beginning. And at the end, have better production for better lives. I want to share with you this small proposal that is just a proposal to start talking all together. It's not that this is the best solution, it's the only solution. We choose 5 indicators to put in place a monitoring system that help us to look at the SDGs and if we are moving or not in those areas that are related to structural problems, not to the symptoms. We need to deal with the symptoms, but if we are not able to transform the reality and intervene in the root causes of the big gaps of the food system, we will be lost. And those 5 that, as I told, could be all different are, is the food system able to feed the people and ensure adequate access for all, or we stay in a situation that a big part of the population around the world is food insecure? Do we produce in a sustainable manner, or we still keep the old practices that made food production unsustainable? Do we protect the rights of tenure and access to natural resources of those that produce food and those that rely on natural resources for their livelihoods, or not? And something that usually we don't discuss, can we continue relying in a food system that is based in a big proportion of unpaid care and domestic work that is not recognized and has been assigned to women, and we are not in the way to start sharing equitably this work? And finally, are we able to solve conflicts in a specific way, or still we rely on violence that affect to human rights defenders and journalists that try to give a voice to those that are at the bottom of the system and suffering the inequalities? If we are not able to transform the food system to address those big structural issues, forget, we will not succeed. And we think that we need to have a mechanism to monitor and also to fix the governance of the global food system. We need to improve the connection between the different spaces where we discuss together about economics, human rights, food systems, and avoid these fragmentations that difficult the adoption of agreements and commitments. And finally, I would like to share a last thought. Transformative impact depends on commitment, and commitment needs to be expressed in terms of resource allocation. If we define a lot of game changer proposals and we are not able to really commit to allocate the resources needed to implement those proposals. Sorry, but our commitment is zero. Thank you.
Juan Carlos, thank you so much for that. That was a terrific presentation and a terrific way for us to begin the conversation. I think we all recognize that we need to be absolutely grounded in human rights around the food systems. And you've shown us the interrelation and interdependence across and within the food systems, but I think most importantly, perhaps the foundational element of human rights and how we need to focus on the systemic solutions that are before us. And it's the perfect segue to the next round of conversations, which I think are in essence trying to make concrete some of those dimensions that you specifically outlined that we need to move forward on. So we're going to talk about rebalancing agency and worker exploitation and localizing food systems. And again, trying to make that concrete with some specific solutions. And as you said, resources, which none of this will happen without that true commitment, which I think is a signifier of that commitment. So wonderful. We are going to hear from 3 of our colleagues that are a part of Action Track 4, Paul, Juan, and Carl. And I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself as well along the way, but we'll start with you, Paul, on agency. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Juan. And thanks for that as well, Michelle. My name is Paul Demerit-Verone. I'm the Water and Ecosystems Program Officer at CARE, and I've been supporting Juan, Carl, Christine, Michelle, and so many others at Action Track 4. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about all the great and urgent work being done inside and outside Action Track 4, because I think these initial solutions are the culmination of collaboration from people, not just in Action Track 4, but really across the world. Christine, do you want to go to the next slide? Great. So there's already been a lot of fantastic talk about the importance of human rights and the importance of human rights, especially as sort of forming the backbone for all of the different solutions a part of the summit. And I think this is, I mean, it's true for every one of them, but I think this is especially true for rebalancing agency, because you can't have agency without human rights. You can't have agency without the right to healthcare, without the right to collectively bargain, without the right to food and water. All of these are essential. Without them, you can't even really begin to talk about agency. So here, when we mean agency, we're specifically talking about the ability to have capacity and skills and strengthen the confidence of women, youth, and indigenous peoples across food systems to collectively challenge social norms, increase ownership and control of resources and assets, increase access to markets and services, and strengthen their voice to promote equitable power relations in households and communities. Because again, really without these capacities, you can't have human rights and vice versa. Next slide, please. So the solutions we've received under rebalancing agency, I think, speak really well to all of the different facets of human rights across the food systems. For example, improving social dialogue mechanisms in the agri-food sector can help contribute to collective bargaining, which plays a crucial role in reaching consensus on issues of concern to workers and employers, and in raising awareness about their rights and obligations. Promoting power relationships that ensure a fair share of resources, finances, capital markets, technology, and prices. I mean, all of that is absolutely critical and something that should also be the backbone of all of these different solutions. And in addition, having gender transformative approaches mainstreamed across the food web, across every sort of sector and job under the banner of food systems. That's also essential to have equity and justice in food systems, and also essential to really consider the different ways that inequitable food systems impact people differently. Juana really talked about how there are multipliers of risk. And this is especially true for women and girls, for indigenous peoples, really all marginalized people. Having inequitable food systems already exacerbates existing forms of marginalization. And then finally, mobilizing civil society and lifting up youth-led initiatives is also critical. Engaging, again, not just women and men, but really ensuring that youth have the ability to participate in the food systems and really have the opportunity to lead some initiatives and policy that really impact their lives directly. So with that, I will pass to my colleague Juan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm Juan Echanove, and I'm the Senior Director for Food and Water Systems at CARE, and it's really a pleasure for me to be with you today. And today I'm going to present you briefly our second bouquet of game changers, which are those around the notion of eliminating working exploitation and ensuring decent work in food systems. So basically, we are referring here to this set of solutions or game changers focus on making value chains inclusive. That's a key word here, through the generation of decent employment and also improving the resilience through social protection. And this basically requires addressing the legal, but also the institutional and the market constraints to the realization of the right to food that Juan was referring to before, and also the equity within food systems, such as ensuring that the laws and the regulatory mechanisms in labor markets, as well as the capacities of the institutions and the communities as well to implement these laws are adequate. And there is also a focus in these game changers on solutions that are about ensuring the international conventions and obligations related to equity and to rights, and that this is incorporated into the national legal frameworks, and that there are mechanisms for application of the laws, and that these mechanisms are functioning and they are accountable and they are also accessible to marginalized groups. And there are actually several game changers or solutions that Action Track 4 have been working related to this broad area of eliminating worker exploitation and ensuring decent work. So, and we plan actually to work in a furthermore. So what I will do is just to describe you some examples of some of those. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so promoting living income and wages in value chains for the small scale farmers and agricultural workers is really key. Because to enjoy sustainable livelihoods, small scale farmers and also workers need to earn sufficient income for a decent standard of living so they can afford healthy diets and they can send their children to school and they can invest in their farms and they can even have some savings for unexpected setbacks and allow elders to retire with dignity. All of this is stipulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, basically in the Article 23. And a living income is defined in our action track as sufficient income to afford a decent standard of living for all household members. So it includes nutrition, diet, clean water, decent housing, and so on, once the farm costs are covered. And we need to ensure that that living income can actually invert the poverty trap for the small scale holders, right? And this will require agreements between actors at the local, national, international level, and also government initiatives or state guarantee agreements, like for instance, the one that Costa Rica reached with coffee producers, and also trade agreements between countries, like, agreements about market access for small scale holders, standards, agreements on prices for certain commodities. And let me refer to the recent initiative on cocoa prices launched by Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, and I believe Cameroon also joined that initiative, that led to an agreement with the cocoa and chocolate industry to create a living income differential with the purpose of ensuring actually this decent revenue by local farmers and a premium paid actually beyond the price for the cocoa future markets. If we can go to the next slide, please. So strengthening labor markets governance, it's also key in order to ensure that agricultural workers' labor rights, because they are human rights, are respected and are guaranteed. And that means, for instance, the right to be paid a living wage, but also the right of direct employment, not always through labor contractors, the right to decent health and to safety conditions in workplace, or the right to be protected by government labor inspection services, for instance. Improve access to the labor market, in fact, is essential, since often labor is the only asset that the poor and the working class in the food sector have. So this is why we have been working on a game changer around this. And also eliminating child labor. There is one game changer that the Action Track 4 is leading, because improving labor market governance requires eliminating child labor in agriculture while addressing the competitiveness issue for agriculture, since children are often used as traditional free or low paid labor, allowing a small scale rural agriculture to remain competitive. Also, contractors in the food sector must be regulated. Very important and part of our game-changing solutions. Because as a result of abuses by labor contractors, and this has happened very often in the context of, or have been revealed in the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, direct employment of workers in meat factories, for instance, is now a legal requirement in Germany, for example, and these models can be expanded in other countries. And finally, let me also mention that agriculture and food sector workers have virtually been excluded from land reform historically, and therefore it's really important to engage them in land reform processes, and that's also the focus of our game-changing solutions. And with this, I will now leave the floor to my colleague Carl to continue exploring another set of game changers or solutions that we have been working on. Over to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Juan. Hello, everybody. My name is Carl, and I'm also working with CARE in the Food and Water Systems team and supporting Michelle and Ifad and all of the leadership group in Action Track 4 on equitable livelihoods. I'm going to speak very briefly about this third area on localizing food systems. So this is really about the plurality of food systems and heterogeneity of food systems. And of course, many food systems are already local and localized. So Action Track 4, a lot of our discussions and solutions have been around protecting that localized system and promoting it and finding ways to further empower small-scale producers. So it is about power and agency, as Paul mentioned, and also sovereignty, and driving towards more equitable livelihoods by localizing systems and protecting that localizing agenda. The first kind of area there that you see is making systems finance accessible for small-scale producers, and that may be formal or informal, making finance available for women in particular, and driving a financial inclusion agenda, but also not just for primary producers, but making finance available for micro, small, and medium enterprise in food systems. The second one is promoting demand-driven transformation. That's essentially also related to some of the game changers that Paul mentioned around enabling environment and opening opportunities for small-scale producers and value chain actors to demand better services. It's about strengthening producer organizations, also driving more responsive cities and local government, for example, and investing in small and medium enterprise business development. And then finally, that area of leveraging local procurement and value chain opportunities. That's essentially about improving and protecting short value chains. We have a solution, for example, on agroecological network chains to link small-scale producers to peri-urban and urban markets. There are also territorial approaches as part of that general area. So the final slide, please, Christine, if I can, I'll just drill into a couple of examples here. The top left, localizing services and support. So one of the game changers we have, for example, is farmer field schools, and that's not new. FAO has been championing that for a long time, but it's popularizing that and driving that as a solution to farmer-led learning. And of course, it's not just about crop production. This is also pastoralist field schools and fisher schools. I put inclusive farmer seed networks in here. That's actually a wave 2 solution. That's something that we're working on, but I thought to add that because it's very relevant to protecting the sovereignty and autonomy of producers. We're working with Action Track 1 and Action Track 3 on that as well. To the right, then, there's more on inclusive finance. So we've got 2 solutions here, which are quite broad and big. One of them is a global matching investment fund for small-scale producer organizations. So this would be a multi-donor trust, if you like. And then the second one is a public development bank initiative to catalyze green and inclusive food system investment. So that's looking at the big development banks and how they can drive food system change. And at the bottom left, then finally, is social accountability. This is something that's coming up in all of our conversations in Action Track 4. And this particular one is around scorecards. It's a community-led accountability mechanism whereby producers and farming communities are able to engage with service providers, both state and private sector, to expect and demand better quality services. I'll leave it there, Michelle. So back over to you. Thanks.
Thank you all, to Paul and Juan and Carl. You did a remarkable job. I'm astounded that we are on time, actually, because that's a lot of information to fit in, and I think speaks to both the some of the as you say, the interdependence here between and the linkages, but also the complexity and all of these technical solutions and terms getting grounded in very specific commitments in geographies and with very specific cross-sector actors. So again, thank you, helping us focus on basically the big concepts of agency and fairness and human and place-centered solutions. So you all can see that there's a lot embedded there. Each one of the things that Juan and Carl and Paul talked about, we could have a whole session on. But in terms of the work ahead, I think even with some of these solutions, we realized that there's a lot of gaps that still remain. So we're going to now turn our attention to how we're going to address some of those. And we're going to start with Elvis, who's from the ILO, and he's going to talk about Elvis is going to talk about what it takes to promote decent work in food systems. And then we will go to Mamadou, who is from CARE Côte d'Ivoire, and she is going to focus on child labor in the cocoa, cotton, and other sectors. And I think everybody knows how important this is, but also how prescient it is with 2021 being designated by the UN General Assembly as International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. So, we're thankful to Mamadou, to you for the opportunity to hear about the work that is before us in that regard. So thank you. And then we're going to turn to Vasanthi, who is from the University of Windsor, about how to institutionalize and mainstream the anti-discrimination and labor rights work that is before us in terms of migrant workers in agriculture and across the entire food chain. So, so I think we're going to start with Elvis, and then we will move to Mamadou, and then we will go to Vasanthi.
Thank you, Michelle. Inspired by the previous speakers, especially Juan from FAO and Juan from CARE, I will also start by citing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But here I'll cite Article 25, which says that everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. And why this is important. Agriculture remains the backbone of many low-income countries, where it accounts to 60% of employment and contributes a quarter of GDP. Many of these jobs, however, they lack significantly in quality and are among most hazardous, unprotected, and poorly remunerated. 2/3 of the extreme poor are engaged in agriculture. A quarter of those engaged in the sector actually live in extreme poverty. So promoting productive employment and decent work and improving resilience through social protection will be critical in supporting sustainable transformation of our food systems and ensuring that no one is left behind. So my presentation will focus today on decent work, and in particular its 4 pillars: productive employment, social protection, social dialogue, and rights at work, and how these have been reflected in the game-changing solutions proposed by 84 members. So let me start with the rights at work. Rural workers are often inadequately covered by labor legislation, such as those specifying minimum wages, injury benefits, social security. And this is often due to the nature of the employment or the absence of a clearly recognized employment status, as is often the case with casual workers, the self-employed or also smallholder farmers, or due to their belonging to a particular group, such as the case with migrant workers. But even when they're not excluded in law, they're often unable to enjoy those rights in practice. The reasons are often simple and include lack of awareness, low literacy, vulnerability to abuse, prevalence of informality, which affects, for example, almost 87% of all employment in Africa and mainly in agriculture, or simply because in many remote areas, law enforcement, labor inspection and compliance are weak or ineffective. So ratification and effective implementation of relevant international labor standards has been recognized as one of the areas for action. There are some 30 ILO instruments. These are conventions and recommendations that are of direct relevance to agricultural sector, but particular attention we pay to fundamental principles and rights at work as enabling rights, and these are freedom of association and collective bargaining, elimination of forced labor, elimination of child labor, and elimination of discrimination in respect to employment. So when it comes to freedom of association, the relevant ILO conventions, which actually have been widely ratified, guarantee that all workers have, they guarantee to all workers the right to set up representative organizations to defend their rights. Nonetheless, in many countries, these workers face barriers in exercising their rights to organize. And in some countries, it can be anti-union discrimination, legislative or administrative obstacles. So as a result, there are relatively few agricultural trade unions compared to the total number of workers in the sector. So this brings me to the second area, which is strengthening organization in the rural economy. And this concerns not only waged workers. So lack of organization, which often characterizes small-scale farm sector, prevents, for example, smallholder farmers and producers from benefiting from economies of scale, increasing their market power. And for example, cooperatives or producer organizations can increase their bargaining power, upgrade productive capacities and technical and entrepreneurial skills, improve access to finance and technology, and enjoy many other benefits. So lack of the organization also, of course, precludes those stakeholders from engaging in effective social dialogue, which would otherwise allow finding consensus-based solutions to many of the problems, especially on working conditions, boosting productivity, and ensuring stable labor relations. It also gives an opportunity for agricultural workers and farmers to have a voice on issues that directly impact their life and work, of course, and these are opportunities that they do not always have. So in this regard, establishment or strengthening of social dialogue mechanisms that bring together government, workers and employers organizations, and other key stakeholders such as small business associations, women groups, indigenous peoples organizations can be a very effective way of designing and implementing strategies to promote decent work. The effective abolition of child labor and ensuring that children can enjoy their fundamental right to be free from child labor is another key area identified and also mentioned earlier by other speakers. ILO estimates that there are currently 152 million children in child labor in the world, 71% of which occurs in the broader agricultural sector, mainly on family farms, but also on large plantations. The scarcity of decent work opportunities for adults and youth of working age, meager incomes and poor wages, which are often based on piece rate systems, lack of social protection, low productivity and skills, limited access to modern technologies, inadequate provision of public services, in particular education, make the elimination of child labor in agriculture a particularly challenging task. So again, we have ILO conventions specifically dealing with the issue. This is there is one on the minimum age to admission to employment, and the second one on the worst forms of child labor, which is actually a universally ratified convention. So it covers in law all children in all countries. Yet we know that the majority of child laborers in agriculture are engaged in hazardous work. So given that the sector, the agricultural sector, is one of the 3 most dangerous sectors in which to work at any age, the impact on children can be particularly devastating, resulting in lifelong disabilities. And this brings me to another important issue, which is occupational safety and health. Again, we estimate that some 170,000 agricultural workers are killed in work-related accidents each year, which means that they run twice the risk of dying on the job compared to workers in other sectors. Millions more suffer injuries in workplace accidents involving agricultural machinery or poisoning by pesticides. So poor safety and health practices, as actually you mentioned in your opening remarks, Michelle, and inadequate working and living conditions in general, experienced by many agri-food sector workers, have come to light during the current COVID crisis, as reflected by multiple outbreaks at food processing plants and farms around the world. And again, unfortunately, we have the relevant conventions, so safety and health in agriculture and labor inspection in agriculture, both of which are actually not very well ratified conventions. The current crisis has also exposed discrimination against certain groups of workers and entrenched gender inequalities, as reflected in the fact that women, young people, migrant workers are among hardest hit by the crisis. So women, we know they make up a significant share of workforce in this sector, but are often engaged in time and labor intensive jobs marked by gender-based norms and discrimination, informal arrangements, poor pay, and lack or little social protection. So this is, again, an area that requires particular attention, social protection, because lack of it perpetuates hunger and malnutrition, and also exposes enterprises and workers to unnecessary risks. And today in the world, 4 billion people are not covered by any social insurance or social assistance. The rest people, they're covered only partially. So again, we have a recommendation on social protection floors, which calls for the establishment of this national social protection floors as a basic set of essential social guarantees to promote at least basic income security and access to health, and facilitate the enjoyment of a number of important economic and social rights. Last but not least, when speaking about decent work, we cannot not mention the promotion of productive employment, which lies at the heart of decent work. And this is particularly important when we speak about agriculture, especially in low-income countries, where agri-food sectors are challenged by low productivity, informality, inadequate environment for enterprise development, limited skills, and so on. So in addressing poverty and food insecurity, particular focus needs to be paid to addressing those issues, improving productivity, output, labor demand in agriculture, but also linking youth to these opportunities. Of course, when we do that, again, focus on providing young people with quality business development services, financial and extension services would be of paramount importance. So to conclude, I would say that decent work challenges facing the sector are significant, but as we are addressing now the impact of the crisis, but also preparing for this important summit, we have an important opportunity to rethink our traditional approaches and to find ways to ensure sustainable transformation of food systems. To be successful, I think the strategies that we develop, they need to tackle all these issues of poverty, agricultural productivity, labor, environment, and other salient issues in an integrated manner, but also have people and their rights at the center. I would stop here, but would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvis. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat because we're going to have time for those. And hopefully we can also have a robust chat conversation. I saw Mamadou. I think he was on just a moment ago. So I will turn it to you, Mamadou, to address issues around child labor in the cocoa, cotton, and other sectors.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Traore Mamadou. I am Value Chain and Private Sector Coordinator in Côte d'Ivoire, in Care Côte d'Ivoire. I'm based in Abidjan. Thank you. So when I understand all the presentation, everybody are talking about the human rights, and particularly children, child labor in the agriculture. So I want to share with you the experience of Care Côte d'Ivoire. Slide. Yeah, based on NOC study assessing progressing in reducing child labor in cocoa production in cocoa area of Côte d'Ivoire in Ghana, we have approximately 1.76 million children, such as 45% of children in agricultural household, in child labor in cocoa production in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, and approximately we have 1.48 million children, such as 43% of children in agricultural household in hazardous child labor. But for the prevalence rate of child labor in the last 10 years, we know that for this study, when we are in the high production areas, the child labor rate is stable. And when we are in the medium production area, the child labor rate is increased by 16%. And when we are in the low production area, it's 27% increasing. So to address this challenge of child labor, we need a multiple intervention, and that can reduce the percentage of 25% of child labor in the fields. Slide. So based on that, Care Côte d'Ivoire and I can say Care Ghana again, we choose a multiple intervention to fight child labor. So we have one of our intervention. We have free strategy. We choose free strategy, and the first is community sensitization for child labor protection. In French, we say ACPE, and child labor monitoring, adding on ACPE, and we have a school full parenting. These are the free strategy we use to fight against child labor on the field here. So this intervention, it focuses on prevention, monitoring, and remediation. In the first time, we do the community diagnosis. It's to know the environment of the children and to build the conscience building access, and then to use the existing potential in the location to address this problem. And after this diagnostic, if we know all the situation on the field, we do the child fora. During the child fora, we sensitize the community, and we train the community and the peoples. And after the training and sensitization, we establish the alert system in the community. We are alert system in community and alert system in the school. The alert system in the school, we have two peoples, one girl and one boy, who take part of this alert system to inform and to monitor the case of child labor in the area. And this approach, when we implement this approach, we collaborate with a community agent, which is the members of the cooperative. This guy is on the community, but he tried to monitor all the situation of child labor of the farmers who are members of cooperative to know what is the situation of child labor in the household. And we guarantee our intervention involving of a public social worker at all stages, because the government have a structure who must guarantee the sustainability of our intervention, and we work together. And then we train the parents among the VSLA group. It's the Village Saving and Loans Association members. The couple of this VSLA group are training to importance of schooling, education, and nutrition. These skills, if we work on that, it can change the behavior of the couple, and that can have a good effect on the children and the family. Slide. Slide. And the free strategy, when we implement on the field, we have some achievement I want to share with you. CARE Côte d'Ivoire is working in more than 800 locations in the Koko region, in the south of Côte d'Ivoire, and in the north region for Coton region. And we have 77% of sensitized community fight child labor afterwards. Already more than 5,000 couple trained, 74% success rate to fight child labor afterwards. Increased number of VSLA whose income increase of women household was used toward child education expenses. Furthermore, we built 30 primary schools, 10 schools collective restaurants, 10 teacher houses, and we distribute 5,000 school desks and 2,000 school kits. Slide. And this is some pictures I want to share with you. You see the women of VSLA who are working on the field, and they're producing for groundnuts. And you see one woman who's very, very happy to when we train her on the field to increase she's a production in the groundnuts. And you see the children who are very fun in the school. You see the kind of school, so we have to build some school to improve the life of children. Slide. And this is the happy household family in Cocoa sector in Côte d'Ivoire. It's the last picture. Thank you very much.
Mamadou, thank you so much. I love that circle of children is a lovely way to close. And I think what we've heard is, Elvis helped us look at these at the macro level, and you've helped take it down to a very specific set of interventions and what that means in the lives of families and communities. So we're now going to turn it over to Vasanthi, who is going to elucidate some of the solutions around migrant workers.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Vasanthi Venkatesh. I'm a law professor at University of Windsor in Canada, a member of Justicia for Migrant Workers who advocate locally and transnationally for migrant workers' rights in the agro-food sector. And I'm also the co-director of the Migrant Farm Workers Legal Clinic in Southern Ontario. So I will briefly go through the issues faced by migrant workers, and then talk about what a solution, what a migrant human rights framework-based solution will look like for these workers. So migrant workers, in what I'm talking about, are workers working out in countries outside of the countries of nationalities, even though the word migrant even though there's a lot of within country migration that happens in the food sector. These migrant workers are an essential aspect of food production in the global north, but as well as countries across the globe. In large groups migrate from work of Indonesians and Filipinos, work in Malaysia, for example, Latin Americans and Central Americans in Canada and the US, workers from Eastern Europe and other parts of the world in Europe. And some estimates have them in millions, others in tens of millions. And as we know, the undocumented or irregular migration population is grossly underestimated. So these workers work in, the way the migration patterns work is that foreign workers in the developing countries are often from neighboring countries, whereas in the developing countries, the workers are from, in the developed countries, the workers are from lesser developed countries. In several developing countries in the global south, there is an out and in migration of foreign workers in the food sector. So as in the more corporatized areas of food production, there is migration of foreign workers from outside the countries, but also because of income loss and wage insecurity, there is an out migration of people to work in other countries. And the COVID pandemic, as you all must be seeing in the papers, has illuminated the dependency of the agro-food sector on foreign labor. Now, these workers back home are often agriculturalists or pastoralists who are forced to leave the countries as they're unable to make sufficient incomes in their farms, fisheries, pastures, food production back home. So as the labor is displaced by corporatization, food trade policies, unsustainable food policies, they in turn work in other countries in large food production, which in turn further displaces subsistence labor in the food sector because of global trade, global food trade. So, and it forms a cycle. So it's, we cannot talk about the labor issues in the sector without thinking about the broader trade concerns that provide the structural basis for their presence. Workers work in other countries in various forms, through bilateral agreements. Countries can have one-on-one agreements with the receiving country, and the sending countries can have agreements on special agreements on the number of workers, when the workers will arrive, even the nature of the employment contract. They can be employer-driven, seasonal or temporary foreign worker program schemes, where the employer is in charge, the farm owner or the meat company is in charge of getting the workers, or through irregular migration, which forms a big number of people working in the agro-food sector. So, but all in all, we need a better data, because we don't have the even close figures as to what the numbers of migrant workers are globally, even though there is sufficient data for specific countries, especially in Europe. The problems that they face, I think, the problems that they face can be boiled down to the unique problems can be boiled down to the fact that they're non-citizens, they're foreigners. So as I say in political science language, they do not have the right to have rights in certain ways. Foreign workers in the agro-food sector are one of the most exploited groups. Now, as Elvis pointed out, in general, agro-food labor is a dangerous form of work. You're working on dangerous machinery, long working hours, exposure to toxic chemicals, makes it one of the, what the ILO calls one of the world's deadliest jobs. But the invisibilization and the political erasure of migrant workers makes them particularly susceptible to exploitation. They end up enduring disproportionate costs to bring food to the table and provide food security, but because they're non-citizens, they have no right to political participation and demand changes. So they are what is commonly known as a no man's land of jurisdiction and governance, no political rights in the receiving countries, and unable to avail of their political rights in their home countries because they don't have physical presence there since they're laboring outside. While they may be invisible in some ways at the meso and the macro level, in other ways they're very much visible, especially at the micro level, because they're from different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds in the countries that they're working in. They include large numbers of people from indigenous communities, for example, from Mayan communities in Central America working in North America and Europe, or indigenous communities from Indonesia working in Malaysia. As a result, in their everyday lives, they're subject to xenophobia and forms of racism, and are often seen as social and criminal threats. In addition to ethnic difference and being a foreigner to the local economies, these migrant workers end up being seen as representing the excesses of corporatization and global trade, the reason for local unemployment. Which is why we see, with few prominent exceptions, local unions until very recently would see these workers as job stealers, stealing from the citizens, as creators of displacement, as the reason for precarious land tenure, and so on. As a result, they're often excluded from forms of social and labor organizations, and obviously in advocacy and policy making at any form of governmental level. And this has a serious human cost on these thousands of vulnerable, marginalized people and their families. The other issue that this brings to core when we think about solutions is the gender and racial segmentation in the sector. The gender and racial segmentation works on gender and race stereotypes. For example, indigenous Central Americans are considered to be better at stoop labor, where the plants are shorter and they can stoop to pick up food products. Women are seen, for example, better in strawberry picking in southern Spain. Indonesian and Filipino women are better in certain sectors, say cannabis production. So this race and gender segmentation impacts even at a nominal level what the health problems they would have, but at a deeper level, the nature of their exploitation and their discrimination. So and the way in many ways in many countries, the employment standards, occupational health and safety are also segmented and separated out based on the kind of food production. Meatpacking sectors will have a different form of regulations within agriculture. Within agriculture, which have harvesting, fruits will have a different structure and so on. So what it means is that it's a very complex set of rules and regulations that these migrant workers are subject to, and forms of segmentation, both in their availing of rights as well as in the way they work. So these workers face weak labor and human rights protections. Some of it is because of lack of ratification that Elvis pointed out earlier, but also as non-citizens, they are often excluded from some critical labor, social protection, and human rights. And even in countries where there are equal labor protections on the books, enforcement is weak or non-existent. For example, complaints-based mechanisms are often ineffectual for migrant workers. All workers fear losing their jobs because of employer reprisals. But unlike citizen workers who may be able to transfer to another job, when migrant workers lose their jobs, they are deported, sent back to their countries, and they lose their livelihood and income. The agriculture sector in general is often excluded from several labor protections, such as limits on hours of work per week, overtime pay, paid sick leave, and so on. And even something as basic as regulated hours of work faces numerous challenges. In seasonal food production, for example, in farms where hours are determined by harvesting needs, it is characterized by long hours during our harvest and very few hours when there's less harvesting need. So what that can imply is that migrant workers have less income security even in giving money back home in forms of remittances. So while limits on hours of work per week, for example, has been noticed to not work, because during harvesting time, they need to work far more than, say, the 40 or 45 hours per week in whichever country that they are. So, but at the same time, what affects them then, it's not the hours of work necessarily, but the fact that they have lack of rest periods, that they have no overtime pay, that there are limited health and safety measures for working in extreme weather conditions, hot weather, hot temperatures during the summer. And that means that the income that they're getting even during their high working hours is at a high cost to their health and safety. Some countries have put a minimum number of hours of pay that they have to be given during times of low harvest, which is a very positive solution. But in many of these countries, these minimum hours are often too less to even provide any forms of subsistence to their families back home. So I don't want to go into the details about these, but suffice to say, I hope this has given an indication as to how protections have to be tailored to the needs of migrant workers. In terms of forms of social protection, such as pension, unemployment, even workers' compensation, for example, in many countries, they can be availed of only so long as a worker is within the host countries, within the receiving country. As soon as they go back, unless there are special arrangements, they cannot avail of these income replacements back home. The high levels of injuries and illnesses that they would have got while they were working in the foreign country, they have a long-term impact on their health, which impacts their families as well. But now it is left to the countries of nationalities to take care of their injuries and their illnesses. So moving on, and the other issue that affects them, and this is in terms of agency, empowerment, and organizing, is that they live and work in isolated groups, often in rural communities. They're not able to bring in their families from whom they're separated for months and years on end, which implicates their right to family life as protected under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Since they're not integrated or allowed to integrate with the local community, it has an impact on their mental and social health, but on organizing and empowerment. Because they do not have the benefit of local communities to organize, to help with organizing and forming forms of collectives, and their work hours and their seclusion prohibits the forming of permanent collectives. They're often organized into crews by contractors and other intermediaries who arrange the jobs in a decentralized system. And these recruiters and contractors, because they enter into a system of debt, bondage, and indentureship, from which they often suffer for the rest of their lives, no matter the income that they earn through their jobs. And because they're temporary, or rather what's often called permanently temporary, it impedes unionization. So they're left without any agency or a collective voice. So as such, a rights-based framework has to be innovative and creative to respond to the needs and institutionalization of the rights. Now, I'll not go through the labor and human rights that needs to be ratified and enforced in general, some of which Elvis has already introduced. But from a migrant worker's perspective, it takes a different flavor, as I have alluded to. So, for example, encouraging workers' collectives or imposing on the receiving countries an obligation to ensure freedom of association and collective bargaining, we need to consider new forms of organizing, such as ethno-community collectives, workers' action centers, and take inspiration from initiatives to organize non-unionized laborers, because there are problems in unionizing these group of workers. Effective implementation of housing and working standards needs a broader articulation. Some have suggested that workers be allowed to live in ethnic enclaves, even in urban areas, because there's much more easy to organize and give voice give them voice, and allow and transport them back, so that they're not living in these isolated communities, subject to the whims and exploitation of contractors and employers at every instance. So we need to think of living and housing conditions, for example, much broadly than just thinking in terms of well, how should these bunk houses be structured? And I keep coming back to this, specific to migrant workers, recruitment and contractor practices have to be heavily regulated, and the workers have to be made free from dependence on these private parties on whom they depend on everything from job security, housing, food, transportation, medical care, legal care, pretty much everything. So, so that kind of solution then requires something that's much broad-based and touches on all areas of governance. And in general, care must be done because they need representation in the making of labor and food policies at all levels, so the voices and concerns can be heard. Right now, the Food Summit, we are hearing voices of many marginalized groups, but migrant workers do not have a voice at the table because of their transient nature of the work, and also because of the way their citizenship functions. And there are many things, many countries have done special forms of solutions, such as skills training as a form of a larger global development initiative and so on, which needs to be addressed at a more systemic level. But these regulations cannot exist in a vacuum if xenophobia and racism is not taken seriously at a political level. Exploitation often has a racial component to justify its social existence, specifically for these workers. And again, as by race, I define it broadly to include indigeneity and all forms of ethnic marginalization. So, but if they're constructed as a suspect group, their rights get automatically differentiated no matter how fantastic the regulations are in the books. So we have to think about general laws and regulations, for example, the criminal legal system and the broader systems that exist, forms of governance that exist. And lastly, again, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is their temporary status. In the migrant worker world, this discourse is often put in dichotomies of numbers versus rights, or the citizenship dilemma. If we give more rights, then numbers will decrease. Fewer people, migrant workers, will get job. But that is not a human rights approach and ensures a race to the bottom. And as many advocates say, what needs to be done is that the floor needs to be raised. Similar arguments are made against regularization, that if they're given more permanent status, they'll act out their citizenship and not take these jobs which citizens are not or unable or unwilling to take to begin with. But many of these workers have been working for decades in these countries, engaging in circular migration for years on end. And it's a democratic deficit if they're going to live their entire existence in a no man's land where they cannot avail of their rights, and they're continuously separated from their families. So as part of the food system and trade policies, we need to address the inequities that trade policies produce at all levels, including what human labor displacement does. And lastly, none of this is possible if their essential role in food production is not even recognized, say, outside of the ILO. So we need to recognize their essential role for a rights-based framework for a sustainable food system. Thank you.
Santi, thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. I think gives us a window into the challenges and difficulties and complexities that are faced here with the solutions that are before us, but you've provided a really tremendous window. So we're going to, I think, move from the eliminating worker exploitation and ensuring decent work in the food systems, which I think you can see from these presentations, Elvis, Mahmoud, and Vasanthi, how foundational that work is just to ensure the most basic social justice around the world. If we tackle this within food systems, we will make enormous progress in addressing larger social injustice. We're going to talk now about localizing food systems. So we're going to ask Florence to give us a presentation. Florence is retired from FAO, but is now consulting with UN Habitat. And she's going to focus, or Florence is going to focus on territorial approaches to food systems. And then we are going to hear from Kap Epp, who is the coordinator of CAADP Non-State Actors Forum, who will give us a presentation about the emerging impact of the platform economy on Africa's food systems, and also the power of digital technology and urban-rural linkages. So Florence, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope the audience is not PowerPointed to death, so I will go on contributing to that. as Michelle said, now I'm going to talk also of the Urban Rural Linkages Program of UN Habitat. But I'm also speaking on behalf of an ad hoc working group on territorial food systems that has developed in the fringes of the preparation of the Food System Summit preparation. And we are now working on an issues paper to share with the Secretariat and all action track leaders, because we believe territorial food systems are cross-cutting. Let me start with a picture. I don't like it, but it's difficult to find open access and be able to get a nicer one. What this is trying to show is that if we look at the planet, we obviously have very clearly different geographical or bioregional areas. And these have very little to do with the political borders of what we call nations, countries, etc. now. So we see that in any given country, you often have several of these bioregions, which means that if we want to go to nature-based solution, it's probably going to be interesting to complement our way to do business with actually a territorial approach. Let's choose any of those areas and see how we can get experience in geographical areas that are often cross-border or even span across continents. I started working on this when I was really frustrated in FAO to have to hire the same consultants on food technology for the Sahel and for semi-arid areas of Madagascar. So, why the hell do we have to do that? Why don't we start sharing experiences of what material exists, where can it be found, so that we stop reinventing the wheel? Good job for consultants, but pretty expensive for doing a proper project. Another picture I'd like to show you this has been developed within the integrated phase classification in response to the drought in the East Horn of Africa and Eastern Africa. Now, clearly, most crisis situations do not kindly stay within borders and just stop at the border. I mean, whether we're talking viruses or droughts or conflicts, they are usually cross-border. And if we address them within the national approach, we have either we're going to miss it out because it's not going to be a priority for that country, or we are going to generate unbalances, because if we deal with Somalia without dealing with Ethiopia, Kenya at the same time, populations are going to move to try and find the food where they need. So if we want sustainable food systems, we have to start looking at territories. So what do we mean by territorial food system? What would that mean to have a territorial food system? Well, basically 3 dimensions. We need to reorient the natural resources management and food production. As we are hearing throughout all the 80s, we need to transition to agroecology. We need to adopt nature-based solutions. We need to do restoration, etc., etc. We need to revive local economies. I mean, the system we've been pushing since the 70s that is now relying increasingly on long food chains has actually led to desertification of rural areas, a degradation of the environment, and increase of poverty and malnutrition in those areas. So it's important to revive those local economies. And now that we have all the IT tools we have, it's much easier to do that, because you can actually live, have access to social services, have a job, etc., if you have access to internet and some basic infrastructure in any area of the world. The most important thing, I put it last, but just because it's the order we did in the paper, it's human rights and social protection. And this has been amply discussed at the beginning of this meeting. So if we look at those 3 dimensions, we are going to get a solid basis for a more integrated territorial development approach. Now, how do you make this happen? In order to do that, you first need to acknowledge that cities and local government, local authorities are playing a key role. And they're very rarely at the table. When we're discussing at international level, we work at national level, we work at global level, but we actually do not work with territories. And we believe that multi-level governance is essential, and we need these 3 levels to be operating and interacting in a smooth way. So that will mean we need knowledge management of what is happening at local level, what seems to be working. We need to build up capacity of actors at territorial level, but also people at national level so that they can support them appropriately. And we need an enabling framework to make sure that we have a legal regulatory framework that is not actually undermining any possibility of doing sustainable development in a given territory. One of the things that is very obvious, increasingly obvious, is that cities and local government have indeed a key role to play. And we have seen that when dealing with the COVID crisis. They are the ones who are condemned to action, and they are the ones who are in direct contact with the local reality and with the local actors. So UN Habitat has developed in the wake of the new urban agenda, which was signed in 2016 at Habitat 3 in Quito. They have developed an urban-rural linkages program, which started with coordinating the development of guiding principles and a framework of action, which you can find on that link. More than 100 people from a variety of institutions, academia, UN, NGOs, civil society organizations, etc., were involved in developing that paper. There was a first international forum on urban-rural linkages in November 2019 in Songyang County in China. And there has been more recently a series of urban-rural linkages webinars in the time of COVID-19. Just to give example, this is happening, and we believe it's important to link that with the work CARE and ILO and other institutions that have been talking on that event have been mentioning. So we are very interested in working with all of you. 2 take-home messages I would like to leave with you. We should start with at-risk territories. We're always talking hotspots. We're always talking humanitarian crisis. We know this is where we get an increased number of malnourished people, where we get hunger, starvation. Well, let's not say, oh, we work with development. This is humanitarian, let's not do it. No, that's where we should start. And if we don't get resilience in those territories, we will go on having conflict, we will go on having degradation of the environment, and we will go on having human suffering, destitution. The other point I would like to make is we need to build up on local knowledge and existing practice. I'm fed up with evidence-based information that grows from laboratory or glossy scientific publications. It is very important, and many people have brought this up in today's event, is to look at what is happening on the field. It's never perfect, but there's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot to do to improve it, and there's a lot to do to link all those experiences so that these people don't feel completely dependent and completely isolated, but actually realize that they face very similar problems as other people in similar socioeconomic conditions or geographical areas. So thank you very much for your patience.
Florence, thanks so much. You did a terrific job of making it both really fascinating and also very practical. So very helpful. Thank you. And I very much agree on your 2 points for consideration. It's good guidepost for us. So Kapep, we're going to ask if you are on the line to take the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you to everyone that has just presented. Thank you most especially to Florence. I like your clear conviction on the ideas you shared. I would say I would start by mentioning that I'm not an expert on digital technologies or the platform economy, but I will just try to speak to the trends and the realities that I observe, especially how they affect Africa as a whole, especially within the context of the advent of COVID-19, where we have seen a lot of this platform economy, platform companies developing very, very fast in Africa and taking charge of different sectors, especially in food distribution and marketing. Just to, for the benefit of the doubt, for those who do not know what platform economy is, these are companies that create value by facilitating exchange between two or more interdependent parties within the market, usually the consumers and the buyer. And the most significant aspect of this is that a lot of these platform companies are currently going digital, which is, I guess, part of the trend that has come to Africa. First, let me observe that with the advent of COVID-19, we've seen a different character of response between the developing, or should I say the advanced economies and the developing economies. While the advanced economies were quick to adapt, employing innovative perspectives to engage the problem and to address the challenges as they came, the developing economies were very slow to adapt, particularly the African economies had to suffer some level of disruption before they could begin to adapt. And that's where we see some of these digital technologies and the platform economy come into play. Let me continue by pointing out also that the impact of the platform economy on Africa's agriculture must necessarily be viewed as a consequence of the global digitization revolution, where different digital companies have come up and technologies have come up to help address challenges that we face every day within the society. And this trend sits perfectly with the push for agricultural transformation across Africa, with the adoption of the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program in 2003. And basically, this policy framework, which is continent-wide, seeks, to look at African agriculture as the engine for technological growth in Africa, ensuring economic growth, wealth creation, poverty reduction, job creation, livelihood development, and so on and so forth. And this is supposed to work as a result of the modernization of processes and methods, capacity building for actors, and systemic transformation to address the character of doing business. So platform companies really, before I come to that, let me also mention that the truth is that Africa at the moment is struggling seriously to achieve that agricultural transformation that it seeks to achieve, even though some progress is being made. But digitization, the platform economy, can actually be a game changer if agricultural transformation in Africa is right on the, so to say, the wings of that. And that has been clearly outlined by AGRA's 2018 to 2019 report on the digitization of African agriculture. And this trend has become very evident in regard to the fact that a lot of platform economies have come up to help address different gaps in food distribution and marketing within the advent of the COVID-19. So we are beginning to see so much of this impact, not only on food distribution, but also on marketing and increasingly also at farm level, where farmers, where you see that the 60% of the African population are smallholder farmers, and it is famed that they produce up to 80% of the food across the continent. And we see, for example, in the area of extension, that currently the average ratio of farmers to extension workers is 1 to 2,000. And in Nigeria, we have a larger number, which can range from 1 to 5,000 to 1 to 10,000. I will just mention 2 examples of platform companies that are coming up actually to address different issues. One is Hello Tractor, which allows farmers to connect with tractor owners and rent smart tractors as and where currently it is helping to address the gap of in Africa, where 13 tractors are available for every 100,000 square kilometers, which is a very unfortunate situation. But that's the situation in Africa. I would say several other examples can be mentioned, but the point is to think of the potential that platform economies have for addressing food system challenges in Africa. And the significance here is that these platforms are making it easier for people to trade in food, thereby bypassing several challenges to trade, to physical trade, especially middlemen, cost of transaction, reduction of risks. But also when you look at the other side, you see that they come with their own disadvantages as well. And these may include the bypassing of standards, exploitation of agricultural workers due to the lack of unionization, and the dangers of fraud as well in Africa, given that there are no regulatory frameworks for platform economies. But the truth is that platform economies, platform companies are beginning to show a very huge potential for helping to reduce the challenges that we may face in the physical marketplace, and are creating potential energy to push African agricultural transformation forward by addressing gaps in the food system, which we've seen how they've developed over the last few months, or should I say over the last 1 year, since the COVID-19 became very serious. But Africa's agricultural transformation means, 1, increased capacity for agricultural production, wealth creation from agriculture, seeing agriculture as a business, not just as a subsistence activity, modernizing the methods of agriculture as well. And digital technologies, and particularly the platform economy, can actually contribute greatly to that process of achieving transformation. But in order for that to happen, a lot has to be done to ensure that there is an enabling environment to facilitate that. One is that there needs to be an enabling policy framework to encourage and incentivize platform economies, particularly a policy framework that actually looks at the multi-level factors, the factors at the different levels of society. And secondly, there needs to be serious awareness creation about the role of digitization in Africa and how it can help address simple day-to-day issues. Thirdly, the digital infrastructure needs to be expanded. To date, there are a lot of areas not covered by, for example, mobile networks in Africa. And this really limits also the power of this digitization revolution in Africa. But the fact is that these are already happening, and they're already happening in the advanced world. The other day, we were looking at a paper that was making reference to legal regulations being put in place in several European countries to address particularly the rights of agricultural workers within the platform economy. So these are the kinds of trends that need to come to Africa, but they have not yet come. And we're just seeing the beginning, a tip of the iceberg, so to say. So in conclusion, therefore, aside from looking at these three things that I have mentioned, that I've just mentioned, it is important for the UN Food Systems Summit later this year to look at issues like that of creating such enabling environment, develop standards that will ensure that such enabling environments are put in place to ensure that the platform economy takes root within Africa's food system. And I mean, I have seen what it has really done in Africa so far, and I'm thinking that this would be the way to go. So it is a very important thing that I would like to highlight in this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really helpful to have that insight, and thank you for that thoughtful presentation. So we have just a couple of minutes for questions, and I think fortunately some of those questions are being addressed in the chat. But Florence, maybe I could just ask you, you are having an interesting chat conversation, and so maybe you could share in particular the thoughts regarding the role of innovation in the territorial approach and resiliency. You sort of answered that, but I think it would be really interesting for the group to hear the reflections there. I think they're really relevant.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. No, actually, the issue for me is we should not be, we are in a world where we work on solutions, but we go and say, okay, I know how to do this, and this has worked really well, I'm going to do it there. What we're missing is to see what is happening in a given area. What are the problems? Is there any local response or in a similar geographical area that we could learn from? And how can we have innovation coming in to support this local planning process? That's not the way it usually happens. Usually I have this fantastic technology, and I am going to start convincing ministries of agriculture that this is the solution. And I'm going to go around and the whole financing goes with it. The whole approach is like this. So if we could be much more demand driven, how can we help feed the population better and having more sustainable diets? How can we help the poorest people to make a living? How can they contribute to local economies? How can we reconcile the interests of private sector with the interests of the population in a good environment? I think that's the way we need to start thinking, but that means let's me first try and understand what's happening there and then see if my solution can help, or if I know another one, or if I can adapt it. I don't know if that's what you want me to say, Michelle.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think regionally and contextually based and approach with humility as well. Thank you. And we have, I'm just going to try and get to one or two questions, and then we'll close with some reflections from the other action tracks so we can see how this is all coming together. There is a question here about approaches in the Indo-Pacific region, since we've heard today around Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. I wonder if I can call upon any of my colleagues here to make maybe a 1-minute answer to that question. Anybody want to jump in, Juan or Carl?
Maybe I can jump here. Thank you, Michelle. I mean, first thing I would say is that, of course, definitely many of the game changers or solutions or ideas that have been proposed apply to different contexts. But, you know, even if territorially adapted, following what Florence said, many of them can apply to different contexts. But there are some that basically build on fantastic experiences coming from the Pacific. For instance, all the work on collectives. I mean, there is incredible work in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, that has been kind of nurturing or feeding some of the solutions around that piece that has been very useful. Also, and that speaks both to our action track and to action track 5, all the work on community-based adaptation to climate change, early warning systems for communities and how that relates with livelihoods. It is very much embodied in many of the policies in Vietnam, other countries in the Pacific. Also, we have been learning a lot in terms of, for instance, livelihoods for coastal communities from the experience in the Philippines on community-based, on coastal management, etc. So indeed, I mean, in some cases, I mean, these are examples that are feeding broader solutions, not standalone solutions, but there are also some solutions that have a more kind of Asian or even Pacific flavor of them.
Right, thanks, Juan. And maybe just one sort of big general question, I'll ask this of Christine, which is if people have ideas and suggestions, how do they plug in terms of the next steps of the evolution of these ideas in the Food System Summit?
Yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. Wave 2 is going to be due on 10th of May. I'm going to pop my email in the chat. If you have some great ideas, feel free to send them to me directly. And we also have an online survey, which I will share out on the chat. Over.
Great. So while Action Track 4 is working steadily and hard, so are all the other action tracks. And so just to show that this is an interdependent and interconnected endeavor, we're going to hear from our colleagues in Action Track 2 and Action Track 3. And they'll tell you a little bit about how we are working together, and especially focused on sustainable consumption and boosting nature positive production. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lena from WHO, and then to Zhao, who is with both WWF and is the chair of Action Track 3. So thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I hope everyone can hear me. My internet is not so stable this afternoon. Thank you, first of all, to all the speakers before. I mean, just by the variety of the speakers, you can see how complex but at the same time, how interesting food systems are. We are talking from migrant workers over to territorial approaches, human rights, and so on. So we are the last session of this interesting Zoom session. So I want to jump with my key message first, which is that the activities of Action Track 2, we cannot achieve them unless Action Track 4 actions are implemented. to make the connection to the conceptual framework of malnutrition that has been promoted since the 90s by UNICEF, it's that I see that Action Track 2 is addressing the immediate causes of the problem, whereas Action Track 4 is really addressing the basic causes. And so we will not achieve unless Action Track 4 achieves their activities. So what is Action Track 2 about? It's about the shift of the consumption patterns towards diets that are healthy and sustainable. So this means promoting policies and actions that make it easier for people to make decisions related to their diet that are healthy while also more sustainable for the planet. And in Action Track 2, we have 17 Wave 1 game-changing propositions. And just to give you an idea of what they are, we have propositions about improving communication and information to ensure that people can have clear, understandable, and evidence-based information about the food they eat. We have propositions about on nutrition and eco-labeling, formal and informal education strategies, for example, ensuring that school curricula include nutrition education. We have the proposition of developing economic measures to shift consumption patterns, such as subsidies, but also fiscal policies, income transfers via social protection schemes. We also have, and I want to specifically mention this, a proposition on improving breastfeeding, because breastfeeding is the first food system for infants and young children, and they also have the right to food. And we have propositions on food waste reduction. For example, having 150 countries to launch public-private partnerships to reduce their food waste by 50% by 2030. So it's again, very varied mix of propositions, but it's about, our action track is about changing people's behavior, and that's not easy. And especially when we're talking about dietary changes, because food is about who we are as a person and as a community. So the Action Track 2 game-changing propositions cannot exist in a vacuum and can only work when we take into consideration the lived experiences of people. And a lot of discussion has already happened today in this session about the lived experiences of people. So we can have a fantastic package of coherent policies, and we can have all the correct information to people, but we need something more. And here comes then the interaction with Action Track 4. And I'd like to just briefly explain this with an example. Can we assume that a single mom living in a poor neighborhood will shift to healthy and sustainable food consumption if she is facing discrimination, if she has to manage by working 2 shifts in a poorly paid job in the informal sector without any protection, when she faces inequities and multiple physical, social, and economic barriers that make informed dietary choices out of reach for her? Of what benefit is more knowledge on healthy diets when inequality, like gender inequality, means that an individual has limited say or no decision-making power in the household? So what if, after everything else, the healthy and sustainable diet is still too expensive to afford, or is simply not accessible through affordable transport? So how can we expect for a person faced with all these challenges to be vocal and have the energy to demanding better choices? And that's why we need Action Track 4 to work on this agency. So what I want to mention and stress as well is that dietary behavior is not just about lifestyle choices. It's much more, and there comes in addressing the underlying and the basic causes of inequality that we really have to solve. So overall, all Action Track 2 propositions need to be paired with the efforts to deliver poverty reduction, inclusion, and equitable livelihoods. Otherwise, we won't get there. Thank you.
Beautifully done, and I think really powerfully demonstrating our interconnection, our interdependence here. Wonderful. Ciao. Over to you. Last 5 minutes to close us out.
I will take like 1 or 2 only. So delighted to be here. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Look, transforming our global food system is central to meeting the largest challenges we have as humanity, right? Including climate change, biodiversity loss, food insecurity, and risk of future pandemics, for example. The current food system from an environmental perspective is responsible for about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions, about 80% of the deforestation, 70% of terrestrial biodiversity loss, and has been linked, as we all know, to a dramatic rise in our exposure to zoonotic diseases such as Ebola, SARS, and COVID-19. So a sustainable future requires us to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and limit climate change while improving livelihoods and meeting the fundamental human right to healthy and nutritious food for all. And this is the work that we do across action tracks, and particularly on action track 3. And it's only possible to achieve the transformation in our food system and adopting nature positive production practices at scale and within the planetary boundaries. And when we talk about nature positive outcomes, we also mean people positive, right? And we need to pursue solutions that deliver both of them. Although different solutions will be required in different contexts, the work that action tracks are doing on agroecology, for example, is a fundamental part of this transformation. This is because agroecology, in a nutshell, it delivers social and environmental outcomes, positive ones. It improves both. It ensures dignified livelihoods as much as nature positive impacts, right? So the upcoming UN Food Systems Summit provides us, both action tracks 3 and 4 and all other action tracks, in fact, a unique opportunity to accelerate the adoption of agroecological approaches and to ensure that its relevant principles can be transferred to all nature positive production practices. Aligned with outcomes of the conferences of the UN Framework to Combat Climate Change and the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, agroecological practices and principles, when adopted at scale, will bring us closer to achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Now, protecting nature and improving livelihoods, agroecological approaches deliver resilience and will advance all sustainable development goals. Action Track 3 is delighted to work alongside Action Track 4, in fact, across Action Track, right, to further explore how agroecological approaches and practices can be implemented at pace and scale. We need to work hand in hand with the Committee on World Food Security on this and leverage the great work they have done on the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which was recently approved, and also on the policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches for sustainable food systems. These are incredible assets that involved a lot of work from experts on this field. And we are committed across Action Track to building upon it to evolve our own thinking and our work on the Food Systems Summit. So Michelle and Action Track 4 colleagues, we're in this together. Let's deliver great and synergistic value across all action tracks to transform the food system. Thank you so much for having me here.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, people and planet together are required here. And I just as a plug, I think our own Christine is going to be moderating AT3's public forum tomorrow. So, please feel free to join us. Thank you. So we are at the end of our time. I think we've had a really rich discussion. We've seen the complexity, we've seen the interdependence, we've seen the foundational imperative of human rights. And we've also, I think, invited you to participate with us in the next wave of solutions. So again, we hope that we clearly have seen the imperative for doing this work, both through this conversation and more importantly over the last year. And we have a unique window and a unique opportunity. So let's come together to realize the solutions that can address the extraordinary challenges before us, and hopefully make this summit, as we've said, a true people's summit that will be transformational for the world, both people and planet together. So thanks everybody, and you have in the chat guidelines for how you can continue to be involved, and a special thanks to all of our speakers and to those who are working with us from the other action tracks for not only doing your own work, but helping to do the work that we are together and collectively realizing. So thanks everybody, take good care.
Thanks, bye.